March 8, 1975, 10:47 p.m. Madison Square Garden, New York City. Frank Lucas sat ringside, row 3, seat 7. He was wearing a $50,000 chinchilla fur coat, a matching hat, and enough jewelry to buy 3 houses in Harlem. Around him, 20,000 people screamed as Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier prepared for their third and final battle. But Frank wasn't watching the ring. He was watching the cameras, the photographers, the journalists. And in that moment, 15 minutes of pride erased 7 years of discipline. Across the arena, in the cheap seats, Detective Richie Roberts sat with a newspaper and a lukewarm beer. He wasn't there for the fight. He was there because his informant had whispered something interesting. Frank Lucas will be there tonight. Front row. You can't miss him. Roberts had been chasing Frank Lucas for 5 years. 5 years of dead ends, false leads, and perfectly clean paperwork. Frank was a ghost, wealthy, powerful, untouchable, but invisible. Until tonight. When Roberts saw the morning newspaper 3 days later, his hand started shaking. Page 6, Sports section. There was Frank Lucas, sitting ringside in a fur coat that cost more than most people made in a decade, smiling like he owned the world. Roberts cut out that photograph, pinned it to his wall, and said 4 words that would change both their lives: "I've got you now." But to understand how 15 minutes of vanity destroyed an empire that took 10 years to build, you need to understand who Frank Lucas was before that night and the one rule he'd never broken until then. Frank Lucas grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, in a world that taught him early that being black and visible was dangerous. When he was 13, he watched the Ku Klux Klan murder his cousin for the crime of looking at a white woman. That night, young Frank made 2 promises to himself: never be powerless again, and never make yourself a target. When Frank arrived in Harlem in 1946 at age 15, he carried those promises with him. He worked for Bumpy Johnson, learning the most important lesson of his life: the loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. Bumpy showed Frank how the flashy dealers, the ones with the Cadillacs, the furs, the jewelry, were always the first ones arrested, the first ones killed, the first ones betrayed. You want to be successful in this life? Bumpy told him. Be invisible. Move like smoke. Make money, but don't show it. Power is silent. Frank took that lesson to heart. When Bumpy died in 1968, Frank didn't fight for control. He built something smarter, quieter, more efficient. While other operators drove Rolls-Royces and wore gold chains, Frank drove a used Chevy and wore off-the-rack suits from Sears. While others lived in penthouses, Frank lived in a modest home in Teaneck, New Jersey, with his wife Julie and their children. His neighbors thought he was a regular businessman, maybe a mid-level manager at an import company. They had no idea he was worth $50 million. Frank's invisibility wasn't just about avoiding police. It was about psychology. If people don't see you, Frank explained to his brother Huey, they don't envy you. If they don't envy you, they don't betray you. And if they don't betray you, you stay alive and stay free. For 7 years, this strategy worked perfectly. From 1968 to 1975, Frank Lucas built the most sophisticated legitimate business operation in Harlem. He owned apartment buildings, employed hundreds of people, invested in community programs, and operated so cleanly that federal investigators couldn't find a single prosecutable offense. Detective Richie Roberts had been assigned to Frank's case in 1973. Roberts was different from other cops. He didn't take bribes, didn't compromise, and once famously turned in nearly $1 million in cash he found during a raid. His reputation for integrity made him dangerous because he couldn't be bought or scared off. But even Roberts couldn't catch what he couldn't see. Every time he got close to Frank Lucas, the trail went cold. Bank records? All legitimate. Property deeds? Properly documented. Business transactions? Clean as Fortune 500 companies. Frank's employees wouldn't talk because Frank treated them well, paid their medical bills, helped their families, earned their loyalty through respect, not fear. Roberts spent 2 years investigating a ghost. He knew Frank Lucas was important. He knew Frank controlled significant operations. But he couldn't prove anything because Frank had built everything to withstand legal scrutiny. Then came the informant's tip about the boxing match. March 8, 1975. The Thriller in Manila at Madison Square Garden. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, the most anticipated fight of the decade. 20,000 people, including politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and half of New York's underworld. Frank Lucas had tickets because Ali was a friend. Not a business associate, a real friend. They'd met years earlier through shared community work in Harlem. Ali respected Frank's investment in black neighborhoods. Frank respected Ali's courage and principles. When Ali's people offered Frank ringside seats, Frank hesitated. Ringside meant visibility. Visibility meant risk. But it was Muhammad Ali. The greatest boxer alive. A once-in-a-lifetime fight. I should go, Frank told Julie that morning. Then go, she said. But wear something normal. Please. Frank nodded. He planned to wear a simple suit, sit quietly, watch the fight, and leave. That was the plan. But then something happened that Frank Lucas would regret for the rest of his life: ego. That afternoon, Frank was getting dressed when his friend Nate stopped by. Nate was everything Frank wasn't: flashy, loud, expensive. He walked in wearing a full-length mink coat. "Frank, you can't go to this fight looking like a schoolteacher," Nate said, laughing. "This is Ali Frazier. This is history. You need to look like somebody." "I am somebody," Frank replied quietly. "Then dress like it." "Man, you've got more money than anyone I know, and you dress like you work at the post office." Something in that comment stung Frank. For 7 years, he dressed down, stayed quiet, remained invisible. For 7 years, he'd watched lesser men show off their success while he hid his. And for just a moment, one dangerous, costly moment, Frank Lucas's pride overruled his discipline. "You're right," Frank said. "It's time people saw who I really am." He went to his closet, to the back, where he kept things he never wore. A chinchilla fur coat, custom-made, worth $50,000. A matching hat. Diamond cufflinks. A gold watch that cost more than most cars. Julie saw him getting dressed and her face went pale. "Frank, what are you doing?" "I'm going to a fight." "Dressed like that? That's not you. That's not who you are. Maybe it's time people knew who I am. The people who matter already know. The people who don't matter don't need to know. Please, Frank." This is a mistake. But Frank was already committed. Pride is a strange drug. It makes you feel powerful while making you vulnerable. And that night, Frank Lucas chose pride over wisdom. He walked into Madison Square Garden at 10:30 p.m. looking like royalty. The chinchilla coat caught every light, every eye. People turned, whispered, pointed. Frank Lucas, the invisible man, was suddenly the most visible person in the building. He made his way to his seat, row 3, perfect view of the ring. Photographers were everywhere, capturing celebrities, politicians, anyone who looked important. And Frank Lucas, in that $50,000 coat, looked very important. The fight started. Ali and Frazier went to war. 14 brutal rounds of two legends destroying each other. It was beautiful, violent, historic. And Frank Lucas sat there, coat gleaming under the lights, completely unaware that multiple cameras had captured him. Across the arena, Detective Roberts watched through binoculars. He'd almost given up on finding Frank in the crowd. 20,000 people. Impossible. But then he saw the coat. Impossible to miss. Roberts didn't approach. Didn't arrest. Didn't do anything. He just watched, memorized the seat location, and waited. 3 days later, the newspapers hit the stands. The Daily News. The New York Post. The Times. All running stories about the fight, with photographs of celebrities at ringside. And there, on page 6 of the Daily News, in a photograph capturing Muhammad Ali's corner between rounds, sat Frank Lucas in his chinchilla coat. The caption read, "Boxing fans from all walks of life attended Saturday's historic bout." Roberts saw that photograph at 7 a.m. over coffee. He cut it out carefully, brought it to the precinct, and pinned it to his investigation board. For the first time in 5 years, he had a face. A confirmation. Proof that Frank Lucas existed and, more importantly, proof of wealth that couldn't be explained by legitimate business alone. Nobody owns a $50,000 coat from running apartment buildings, Roberts told his partner. Roberts began showing that photograph to informants, witnesses, business associates. "You know this man? Ever seen him? Where does he work? How does he afford this?" Suddenly, people started talking. Not because they wanted to betray Frank, but because seeing that photograph made them realize Frank wasn't untouchable. If Frank Lucas could be stupid enough to wear that coat in public, maybe he wasn't the genius everyone thought. Within 3 weeks, Roberts had more information on Frank Lucas than he'd gathered in 2 years. Addresses. Associates. Business fronts. The photograph had broken the spell of invisibility. Frank realized his mistake about 2 weeks after the fight. He started noticing things, cars that seemed to follow him, people asking questions about him in the neighborhood, a subtle shift in how people looked at him. His brother Huey came to him worried. "Frank, people are talking. That coat. That fight. Everyone saw you." "So what?" "I went to a boxing match." "You went to a boxing match dressed like a king. For 7 years, you taught us to be invisible. Now you're on the front page of the newspaper." Frank tried to dismiss it, but deep down, he knew Huey was right. He'd broken his own rule. And in this life, breaking your own rules is how you lose everything. By June 1975, Roberts had built enough evidence to get warrants. Not enough for prosecution yet, but enough for surveillance, wiretaps, and pressure. The investigation that had been cold for years was suddenly hot. Frank tried to go back to being invisible, but it was too late. Once you've been seen, you can't unsee yourself. The photograph had given Roberts a starting point, and from that starting point, he could work backward and forward, building a case piece by piece. Frank's associates started getting nervous. Some started cooperating with police, not out of disloyalty but out of self-preservation. The empire that had seemed untouchable was showing cracks. Julie confronted Frank one night in August. I told you not to wear that coat. Why didn't you listen? I wanted people to see who I was. The wrong people saw who you were. And now what? Now everything we built is at risk because you needed 15 minutes of showing off?" Frank had no answer. She was right. 7 years of discipline. 7 years of careful planning, legitimate businesses, clean operations. All of it threatened because of one night, one coat, one photograph. The final blow came in January 1977. Frank Lucas was arrested at his home in Teaneck. The charges were extensive, built on 2 years of investigation that started with a photograph from a boxing match. In the police station, Detective Roberts sat across from Frank, that photograph on the table between them. "You know what's funny, Frank? I spent 5 years looking for you. 5 years. Couldn't find you anywhere. You were perfect. Invisible. Then you wore this coat to a boxing match." Frank stared at the photograph. His younger self, smiling, proud, draped in chinchilla. He looked like success. He looked like power. He looked like everything he'd spent 7 years trying not to look like. 15 minutes, Roberts continued. That's how long you were visible in that coat before the fight started. 15 minutes. And those 15 minutes gave me everything I needed to start unraveling your entire operation. Frank said nothing. What was there to say? Roberts was right. Bumpy Johnson had warned him. Julie had warned him. His own instincts had warned him. But ego is louder than wisdom, and for 15 minutes, Frank Lucas had listened to ego. Years later, after serving time and rebuilding his life legitimately, Frank was asked about his biggest mistake. He didn't talk about business decisions or trust or betrayal. He talked about a coat. "I wore a $50,000 chinchilla coat to a boxing match," Frank said. "And that coat cost me everything. Not because it was expensive. Because it was visible. My whole life, Bumpy taught me, stay invisible. Move quiet. The moment you announce yourself, you make yourself a target. And for 15 minutes, at that fight, I announced myself to the world." The interviewer asked, "Do you regret going to the fight?" "No. I regret forgetting who I was. I spent 7 years being smart. Then I spent 15 minutes being proud. And pride is expensive. Mine cost me my freedom, my business, my reputation. All because I wanted people to see me." What would you tell your younger self? Frank smiled sadly. "I'd tell him what Bumpy told me 30 years earlier, the loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. Stay invisible. Stay smart. And never, ever let ego make your decisions." The photograph from that night still exists. You can find it in archives, and documentaries, and books about Frank Lucas's life. Frank Lucas in his chinchilla coat, sitting ringside, smiling at history. It's a photograph of success. Of wealth. Of a man who'd beaten the system and wanted the world to know. It's also a photograph of the exact moment Frank Lucas lost everything he'd built. Because in this life, in business, and survival, the most dangerous thing you can do is announce yourself before you're ready to handle the attention. And Frank Lucas announced himself 15 minutes too soon. If this story of pride, consequence, and the cost of visibility moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that real power moves in silence. Share this with someone who needs to hear that showing off always costs more than staying quiet. What would you have done in Frank's position? Let me know in the comments. More legendary stories of wisdom and warning coming soon. Don't miss it.